Hello, everyone. We are so excited to have you here today for this, what I think is going to be a really interesting webinar called Rescuing Potential, Coaching Underperforming Leaders for Lasting Success. This is a cool topic for us. We've got some great research on this topic. And then, of course, your presenter, Trisha, is going to give you lots of really good tips and tricks and talk about some of her experiences. So thank you for joining us. I am Stacy Nisbet. I'm the vice president here at MRG. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things, and then I'll put you right over to Trisha. We are going to give you the slides, a recording of the webinar, Q&A in case we don't get to all the questions that come up as we go through the webinar. It's a tight 45 minutes, so we're going to get to as many questions as we can. Please use the Q&A option in your menu in Zoom and type those questions in there. Anything we don't get to live, as I mentioned, we will answer in our follow-up. So I'm going to immediately just send it right over to Trisha. We're going to turn our cameras off eventually so that you're really just focused on the content. Over to you, Trisha.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Glad you're here. This is a topic we look at pretty regularly. We've got very updated research about what's happening in the leadership space over the last 5 years. For those of you who don't know us, we've been around for 43 years. Our focus is developing assessments and applying those insights to support leadership development and professional growth in organizations. Because we've been around for a while, we have quite a large database of over 2 million assessments. And so we can do some pretty robust research. And so we're going to apply that research for you today so that you can really get some insights into patterns of behavior that are less effective in the leadership space. And if we can recognize them early, we have a better shot of helping leaders avoid the pitfalls or spending too long in this underperforming place. As Stacy said, I'm going to shut off my camera. I move around a lot, and I can be a distracting focus when you're trying to focus on the slides. But of course, we wanted you to know that we're not bots, and we're really here. We'll come back on at the end to check in. So let's dive in. So we're going to start with a poll and really get going and understand the experience of the folks on with us today. So when you think about your experience with underperforming leaders, particularly for those of you who are coaching or managing or really trying to help these leaders come out of that space, tell us about your experience. Click all the ones that apply for you. Maybe you haven't yet had a chance to work with anybody who's underperforming in a very direct way. That's great. Maybe you have coached underperforming leaders in the past. You might be coaching one right now, or you might be coaching somebody who is actually one of their challenges is they're working for an underperforming leader. So thanks. We see people are responding pretty quickly. Just click away. It's a good way if you're morning like us. Maybe you haven't quite gotten your coffee yet. If you're coming to us from Europe, perhaps you've already got a glass of wine. In what case, we're jealous.
All
All right,
right.
couple more
75,
seconds.
75%. Oh, now we're back down to 73. That just means more people are coming in. All right, we'll go ahead and close the poll so you can keep on moving, Trisha.
All right, so we've got most of you have coached underperforming leaders. Small percentage haven't yet seen, maybe not worked yet with underperforming leaders or a little bit distance from it. We've got some folks who are feeling currently that you have either in the past or currently, and several of you are coaching folks who are I was going to say suffering, that's a little too dramatic, but are challenged by working for somebody who is underperforming. Thanks for that. It gives us a good sense of who you are in the space. So let's keep going. All right. So I think we all know this, right? It's probably why we're here, but just to sort of level set, what are we seeing in terms of the cost for underperformance? Well, first of all, there's a cost to the leader who is in that underperforming space. Nobody starts off in this leadership space saying, I'm going to show up as a leader who doesn't perform well. So there's a cost to the leader around their professional identity, their success. Being a leader takes a lot of energy to begin with, and if the outcome of that energy is that people are finding you not effective, there's a cost for that. Obviously, there's a cost to the people that they're working with, right? To their team, to their peers, to their manager who is feeling like, well, this person isn't delivering what I need them to deliver. It's hard enough to be at work. And so if you're working for an underperforming leader, it creates a burden for you. So all around at a human level, there's cost. At an organizational level, right? We invest a lot in bringing these people on and or promoting people. If we're investing in development, that's a cost. If we have to actually replace this person, we lose productivity in that spot. It's a cost to recruit people. So there's a cost of having to replace the person. Lost productivity all around, right? If somebody is underperforming, that means they're not delivering what the organization needs them to deliver. And there's a trickle down effect of that. Often their manager, that means that their manager isn't delivering, the direct reports aren't delivering. Oftentimes there's a cost to the productivity cost to the peers. So we're in general, we're just not hitting the mark that we're hoping to hit. And of course, over time, when we're dealing with underperformance, there is a direct cost of employee engagement going down. But also, if we're an organization that lets this go on for too long, there's a frustration of, I'm bringing all that I can into this work and I'm trying to achieve, but the organization isn't dealing with the people around us who are not offering the same return on investment that I feel like I am. So, all of us have dealt with this at some level, either personally in our own employment experience or as a professional supporting this. So let's look at why leaders are underperforming. Again, under the umbrella of nobody starts in a leadership position thinking that they're going to underperform. So one of the things that's an issue here is who are we bringing into these roles? So what are we doing in terms of hiring? What are we doing in terms of evaluating people? So let's assume we'll leave that to the side, this whole, effectiveness in hiring. Once they're in, I think one of the challenges is I don't think we've ever in 43 years worked with an organization who is touting how great their feedback culture is. So it's not unusual that one of the reasons we see underperformers continuing to underperform is either lack of or poor feedback. Another thing is unclear expectations. We work with a lot of leaders who aren't exactly sure what is expected of them, or the expectations keep changing, or the expectations are conflicting between multiple parties within the organization. We also see insufficient investment in development, right? This always, it astounds me that we think leaders should just kind of either figure it out on their own or that they should, with maybe some self-study materials or maybe a leadership development course they attend once every 2 or 3 years, or maybe with some sprinkled in coaching somewhere, it should be enough. Leadership is complex. The dynamics and the context are often changing. And we need to be thinking of what does development look like in a modern context. And then lack of early detection. Um, because we are often in subpar feedback cultures, a lot of what happens when there starts to be early signals of underperformance is the people around them just hope it will go away, or they give sort of subtle hints, or they're hoping somebody else will take care of it, right? So, what do we do, right? What's the obvious response to these things? Regular feedback. We're an assessment organization, so of course we think assessments are part of it, but also just the verbal feedback, that normalizing feedback so that we don't stack it, wait for it, that we're delivering it on a regular basis. Taking the time to make sure there are real clear expectations for both behavior and outcome. A lot of what happens in some of these that you'll see is they might be achieving some of the outcomes, but the way that they're doing it isn't okay. So the more we can be clear to people about what we're hoping on the output side, but also your way of getting there matters. I'm going to just let me climb on the soapbox just for a second with this one. Imagine if the advice to any one of us individually for our overall health and wellness was if you just spend a week every year exercising and eating healthy, you're good to go for the rest of the year. We would think that that was crazy. It would be nice, but it would be crazy. So it's the same with leadership development, right? In order to be a healthy, well functioning leader, as the leadership environment becomes more complex, it changes rapidly, your team changes, you change, the goals change. The idea that we will just drop you in leadership development situations, if we do it all, by the way, on occasion, and then the rest you're on your own, just doesn't make sense. So the more we can move to integrating development as an ongoing component of our work, the more we will see higher performance and the less we will encounter underperforming in all employees, but for today, leaders. And then to really educate managers of these leaders to watch for early signals. And that's what we're hoping some of the research does so that you can see it sort of when it's starting to come, how we recognize it. And to really help these managers because it's easier to address it when it's coming up in an earlier stage than when it has already created a lot of challenge. And the leader who is underperforming understandably says, hey, I've been doing this for weeks, months, longer, and nobody has said anything. All right, so what are we bringing to you that hopefully we find helpful? We've got some research that is going to show 4 patterns of leadership that are ineffectual and are ineffectual across really broad contexts. And by using the research, it becomes less he said, she said, they said. It's more, boy, we have evidence that when people start showing these patterns, they're on track to be off track. So it can help with early detection. We are huge proponents of really talking about behavior. A lot of times when they do give feedback or give hints about feedback, they talk about motivation or they talk in conceptual terms or they talk in huge blocks of competency language that is not actionable. So behavior is very clear, it's measurable. People can actually take action on it. And behavior as opposed to motivation or personality or values or even beliefs, we can work with behavior. Behavior is changeable. So we anchor this research and we anchor the coaching and association with the research strongly in behavior. All right, so let's talk about how we got to the research because this is very research based. I want to show you the model, the way that we got to these 4 types of underperforming leaders. So we're using our 360. We're huge proponents of 360. We know that it's very hard for people to see themselves the way others do, particularly in a leadership context. We also know that leaders have a lot of blind spots in their own approaches to leadership. If you're interested in that, we'll include our blind spot research in that shows for a behavioral pattern, about 1/3 of the behaviors in general, the leaders don't see themselves the way others see them. So our particular assessment measures 22 very specific, observable, actionable leadership behaviors. Our way of measuring it through the questionnaire is unique. We use a semi-ipsative, which is a combination of forced choice and anchored rating scale. We then norm those so we get wide distribution in behavior patterns, which makes this research a lot more meaningful, easier to access. Like all 360s, it is split into both self and then boss, peer, and direct reports. We could talk for a long time about how 360s are getting more complicated as organizations become more complicated in their structure and matrixed. So as an aside, it's not uncommon for us to see more than one person in the boss or managerial slot, different groups of peers and or different groups of direct reports or direct reports with skip level reports in our 360s. I don't know how you actually categorize that in terms of degrees, but it's becoming more complicated. So that's behavior, right? We are looking in our behavior assessments, we're looking at the pattern of behavior that leaders are exhibiting. But we need to get to effectiveness. We need to know the perceptions of how effective these leaders are. So we have a second portion of our 360 assessment, which looks at observer data for 29 specific leadership competencies, asking the question, how effective is this leader in these 29 different competencies? For this portion, we use a traditional anchored rating scale of 7 points. And so the leaders are getting rated 1 to 7, classic, right? 1, least effective, 7, highly effective. Again, observer groups rated here. Boss, peer, and direct reports are rating the individual leaders. All right, so this is what we have. We have behaviors. We have 22 behaviors. What are they doing? How are they showing up? What can we witness in terms of actual behaviors? And then what's the impact of that? How are they performing? How effective are they in the kinds of things we expect leaders to be effective at, right? And so that's the research. We are looking at the data for those who are least effective and then saying what behavior patterns are making them least effective. All right. So this is the study. Over 10,000 leaders we've looked at in this study. So it's a very big study across 40 different countries, lots of different roles, different levels, different functions. We're really looking at a very broad swath of leaders. And it is data in the last 5 years. So from 2020 right up till I think that we closed it out in August, right? So very recent data. The mix of gender identification, 57% male, 40% identified as female, 3% either identified as other or gender not reported. All right, so here's what we're looking at. We are looking at the bottom 10%. So we're looking at those competencies and we're looking at the people who scored in that very broad 10,000 people. Who were the bottom 10%? So the underperformers are just over 1,000 leaders as rated by observers as underperforming, right? So in this group, it's slightly different demographics. Once we just look at underperformers, 65% of this group is male, identified as male, 33% identify as female, 2% either not reported or identify as other. All right, so slightly different gender identification mix. So this is what we're going to be looking at is just over 1,000 leaders, 10% of that population of 10,000. All right, just a couple things to think about as we go through this. We're assessing leadership, right? So those competencies are measuring leadership competencies. How effective are you at delivering results? How effective are you at developing people? How effective are you at managing conflict, right? These are things that we expect leaders to be effective at. So we're not measuring sort of generic employee effectiveness. So when we're going through these patterns, some of these behavior patterns, you might say, well, I wouldn't mind working with that person, right? So again, we're looking at leadership effectiveness. This isn't generic sort of employee effectiveness. And you'll see some of this as we go through. The other thing is, we always say this with our research, context matters, right? So this research involves a diverse group of leaders in every way you can measure diversity in a pool of 10,000 leaders. So some of these things, it would be a stretch, But some of these things might actually be okay in certain contexts. So you really have to consider the context. And this doesn't represent all the things that can make a leader less effective, right? These are broad themes that really showed up when we looked at our data. So you might be thinking of a leader you know or a leader you're working with that has a specific set of things that um, are contributing to them being less effective than they might be otherwise, and that might not show up here, right? So let's dive in. But before we do, I just want to make sure everybody feels comfortable with how the research is set up and how we're defining how we came to these 1,000 leaders who are not being effective. So, um, any how we doing, Stace? Any questions we need to tackle before we
No,
dive into?
no, we're good. Just a request to share the full research, which we do, which we will. Oh, sorry, one just popped up. How did the research account for bias or lack of competence of observers? Was there
So it,
any? Yeah.
yeah, it's straight 360, right? So we're really just looking at the observers as for each of the individuals, right? They choose who is filling out their questionnaire, and it is how they respond to how effective the person is. Because the data is so massive, and because we are not saying sort of the bottom third, we're really saying the lowest possible ratings. We're very confident that these patterns are uh, are valid in terms of what isn't working in the leadership space. I would also say, once again, we talk about this all the time when we do 360s, right? Everybody's biased. We don't get away from the fact that when we're dealing with human beings, the leader is biased, the observers are biased. And so what we speak to when we work with leaders is you have to deal with the fact that people are going to register your behavior through the lens of their own biases and assumptions. And that's part of the big hurdle that leaders face in figuring out how to behave in ways that actually land to a vast, diverse group of observers who are looking at your behaviors and your way of engaging through the lens of their own biases. So unfortunately, I'm not sure anybody has found a great way to de-bias the perceptions of human beings. We'll get there at some point probably, but I don't think we're there yet. All right, let's look at the 4 common types of underperforming leaders. I'm doing a sort of a countdown from the pattern that was least common to the pattern that was most common. Um, Before we dive in, let's get your thoughts from your own experience, from your own perspective, maybe from research that you have on that you've looked at or have done yourself. Which of these behaviors, when used more strikingly, is associated with underperformance? So being dominant, sort of being aggressive, being very forceful, showing empathy, kind, concerned, generous, demonstrating excitement, enthusiasm, building that, or all of the above. Can you imagine all of these, any or all leading to underperformance? So just click away. Um, Again, being aggressive in that space, showing empathy, demonstrating excitement, enthusiasm, all of the above, coming fast and furious.
Trisha, I'm just going to give you one more quick question while people are answering. So,
Okay.
were the leaders in the study taken from 360s previously done, or was there a specific group of underperformers used?
No, so the leaders were, these were 10,000 leaders in our database. But no screening ahead of that. We just took 10,000 leaders who were um, who had taken the assessment between 2020 and 2025 they had a full range from, those who were rated highly effective, which by the way, most of our research is what distinguishes highly effective leaders in different context, level, function, different kinds of competencies. But this was looking at that broad swath of leaders who were rated all the way from 1 to 7 and all these competencies, looking at those within that population who were in the lowest 10%. So generic wide distribution for 10,000 leaders, looking at the bottom 10% of that. Hope that answers it. And if it hasn't, clarify your question and I'll come back. All right. So you can see people are imagining of these 3 behaviors that dominant, being dominant, aggressive is that has the strongest endorsement of the individual. But over half of you recognized that, yeah, any of these overused can be an issue. And we'll see the truth of that in just a minute. Okay. Um, the first from the countdown, right? From the countdown, from the least frequent to the most. We labeled this one contained and cautious. Of the 1,000 leaders, 19% fell into this category. And the challenge with this one in the what makes it not work, they're overly reserved, overly conservative. And when you're looking at the input they take in terms of how they approach the role, they're over reliant on their own perspective and over reliant on people who are more senior than them in the organization. And as you'll see, they're also missing engagement with behaviors that help make a leader more effective. So, what are they doing? So, when we look at patterns of behavior, we look at, in this case, what might they be overutilizing, right? Too much a reliance on these particular behaviors, and what might they be underutilizing. So, what these folks are over relying on is being conservative, cautious, careful, prudent. So, when we look at too much, it doesn't mean that any of these behaviors in and of themselves derail people, derail leaders, but it is the turning the dial up too much on these behaviors. So an over reliance on being cautious, an over reliance on your own point of view, on sort of separating yourself in thinking and action from others so that you lose the perspective of those around you. Overuse of restraint. So those of you who know a fair amount in the communication space know that a lot of what we do as humans in terms of understanding each other is nonverbal, right? So we're looking at facial expressions, vocal tone, body language. When somebody is hyper restrained, they are very hard to read. So in particular, in a leadership space, it can make it very challenging. And while anybody who works in an organizational context needs to be mindful of the hierarchy and what's expected, when there is an over reliance on deferring to authority, you become, again, less effective in the leadership role, where in particular, peers and direct reports often want you to have a point of view and have courage to be able to challenge the authority in appropriate context. So for this role, for this particular underperforming category, what are they underutilizing? So excitement is generating enthusiasm, and oftentimes leaders need to be in a position where they're building up motivation, they're building up energy, they're engaging hearts as much as minds, right? So not utilizing that. Control in this model is monitoring, tracking, following up, and making sure things go to completion. Because this type is very sort of self-focused, they're not looking as carefully about what's happening around them. Management focus is the behavior of taking charge and providing direction, sort of more leading from the front. This person this type is not leading, is not engaging in sort of classic leadership behavior. And they're also not focused on setting the expectations high or cycling through phases of encouraging people to have ambitious goals, right? So, too contained, too cautious, not engaging others, not stepping into that leadership space. The next in our countdown, we call the happy follower. This is actually, when you look at this, you'll think that this might be a lovely person to have lunch with. They are a really, you'll see they're very kind. This represents in that population of just over 1,000, 22%. But you'll see as we look at their engagement in their behaviors, they're not exhibiting much in the way of what we're looking for in leadership and management. So they are over relying on very social behaviors. So they're outgoing, they're informal, they're very willing to help, they are very willing to compromise. They ask others for their input, they value other people's input. They also defer to people in authority, and they show a lot of empathy, right? So these are these are this is not a technical term, but I would call these the organizational love bugs, right? They care a lot about people. They want to help. They want to hear what other people have to say, including the people above them. They really are generous and kind. These are really, really lovely people, but we want them to be leaders. And so what are they not what are they not engaged with at a level that we would hope as leaders? They're not demonstrating any innovative behavior. They're also not demonstrating strategic behavior to think ahead and to understand the consequences, to think about the bigger picture. They're also not demonstrating a lot in the area of their own expertise or specialized knowledge and skills. So these three you can see are all in that cognitive space. They too are not exhibiting that management focus, that sort of stepping out to when they need to take charge, to provide direction, to provide guidance. Oops, sorry about that. So, what we see in this thematically is they are kind and caring people, but from the cognitive sort of perspective of really helping people think through what we need to do and really stepping out and taking charge, they're very much sort of off to the side, being kind and generous. So again, remember we talked about this as an employee, depending upon their role, they could be a nice team member, but not as successful in the leadership role. We call this next one, which is about 27% of our population we see in this, the engaging lightweight. This is one that I know many of you have encountered. This is somebody who is very charming and really knows how to like work a room or kind of navigate things, sometimes even in a political way. But when you look at the substance of what they bring to the table, both in terms of really rigor of thinking and also discipline in getting things done and taking responsibility for the leadership role, that's where it doesn't show up so much. So, what are they doing? What do we see that they're over relying on? Again, we see the self, that they are really seeing things from their own perspective. They're very independent. They take their own counsel. They're very persuasive. They're good at, I was going to say schmoozing. I probably shouldn't say schmoozing, but they're good at, being smooth and creating compelling stories to bring people in. They are very social and outgoing. They are able to generate a lot of excitement, draw people in emotionally, right? So they create a really compelling impression, right? What aren't they spending a lot of time doing? They're not spending a lot of time thinking, being strategic, analyzing, thinking of the big picture. They also are not demonstrating a lot in the area of expertise, deep knowledge in something, really bringing some specialized skills into place. They are not restrained or calm. They turn the heat up in environments. They are not detailed. They don't lay out a methodology, or they're not laying out processes and creating a way for work to get done in an organized way. While they are very persuasive, when it comes to the details of ensuring everybody has what they need to get the job done, making sure that expectations are clear, they're not engaging in that space. And finally, the behavior of ensuring that things get completed, really tracking and monitoring and making sure that not only that the work is organized and people know what they're supposed to do, but that as you encounter obstacles along the way, that they are actually getting tackled so that things can get completed. So you can see that again. There was an old saying. I'm going to show my age. The sizzle without the steak, right? It's the charm and the engagement without the thinking and the disciplined way of accomplishing things in play. All right, last one. This is the one that we see most frequently. This is 32% of this, and we call it my way or the highway. For those of you who endorsed dominant in this, this was may have been what you were thinking of. This person is my way, the highway is perfect. It's their way. They think they've got it right, and they're forceful at expressing that, right? So, what do we see in terms of the behaviors they're overutilizing? Once again, we see the self. So, I will share with you, I briefly commented that we do a lot of research on the flip side of what we're talking about today, which is what makes a leader more effective in different contexts, different scenarios, with different kinds of outcomes. And overuse of self pretty universally shows up as something that hurts people. And why is that? It's because in the leadership context, most leaders are doing things that require information that they don't have unless they seek it out, perspectives that they need to take into account. They also need to engage hearts, minds, and hands to get people to be on side and engaged. And so going off too far on your own, both in thinking and doing, is counter to that integrated way of thinking and acting as a leader. Feedback. Feedback, as it's measured in the LEA, is very about being very direct and straightforward. Feedback with empathy can be clear and very helpful, but feedback with dominant, as we see here, without empathy, can be really harsh and be so blunt that it's hard for people to take in and often can feel unfair and often can feel also unclear. So this person has this, this exhibiting this, I'm really clear, I'm going to be super forceful, and I'm going to be blunt in the way that I communicate. What are they exhibiting that's not enough? So they're not spending enough time thinking, how can I be helpful? Where ways that it makes sense from an organizational or a relational place to compromise. They are not seeking other people's input. And to the extent they may even ask for it, they're not letting it influence their thinking and their decision making. They are not showing empathy. They're not demonstrating a connection with others. And finally, they're not, from a cognitive perspective, they're not thinking broadly. They're not thinking ahead. They're not aligning what what they're doing with what the organization wants or what broader objectives there are. So they're separate from a relational space, and they're also separate from an important cognitive space in that leadership, which is basically at the most basic level, strategic is thinking before you're acting, right? So for all of these, we have coaching, and in the materials you'll get after this, we're going to offer options for how you might coach people who have these different profiles. So just to give you an example, I'll show you what you'll get by using this one as an example. So you remember the 4 behaviors that this person is underutilizing. We have found it more helpful to coach people on expanding behaviors as a way to balance approach. You can certainly coach on diminishing behaviors that are overused, but that's often harder for people to keep in mind when they're in the heat of the moment. So for this one, we want them to become more strategic, and ways to start are helping them, train them to map out the consequences of the decisions they want to make before they take action. So it's a concrete way to think before you act. We also coach them to think about, always have in front of them what are the overarching objectives and how is what you're doing aligning with those. We are really helping them work on how to, in particular with cooperation, how to seek common ground for solutions that work with both parties. And there's a lot of, quite frankly, emotional work with this because these people often want to move very quickly and don't often put less value on what others want than what they want. But you can work a little bit with their ego here about what do you have that could be of value to others, and how do you make that available to them? Increasing empathy. Oftentimes with these people, what's interesting is they have a little bit more felt empathy than they have expressed empathy. So we're coaching them on very specifically the behaviors that we want to see. How and when are you asking people about themselves? How do you know whether you're actually listening? How are you taking in the information? And how do you acknowledge and consider what they're sharing with you in terms of their situations and their emotions? And then finally, consensual, which, by the way, interestingly, with this group is often where we might start because it's an easier entry than cooperation and empathy, oftentimes for these people. And so when we're encouraging them to ask for expertise and opinions to map out who they respect and value, we often have them because they're so clear that their way is going to work, ask for risks and opportunities that other people see about the way forward, and helping them, coaching them through where they can modify their approaches in ways that they don't feel weak, because that oftentimes that's the challenge with this. So research can show us the trends. You will not be surprised that we are assessment forward as an organization. And the reason we are is this is a great article, even though it's a little bit, you consider it's a little bit dated, but they did a nice macro study on self-awareness. And their study showed that only 10 to 15% of the people that they studied actually fit the criteria for self-awareness, which is why we're big proponents of 360. You know this, right? It gives you objective data. It helps identify blind spots. Again, we'll send our blind spot research to you, where our research shows that on average of the 22 behaviors we measure, leaders are blind to 7 to 8 of those behaviors relative to what their observers see. Um, and really people want to see progress. And if we're measuring behavior as opposed to competencies, which are quite complex, and personality, which as we know is not a great baseline for change, it will give people the kind of opportunities they want. So to be able to be successful. So questions. How about some questions, Stacy? Do we have a couple before we close out?
Uh, yes. All the way back to the first profile, I think that you shared. One of the questions is, would you speculate that being hard to read might create lack of trust?
100%. That's a great perception. And in fact, I, somebody should get the hook because I'm going to say neuroscience, and my colleagues know that this is a dangerous space for me. But when we have power, the people who have less power, their brains become more threat aware. When people have threat activated brains, they think less completely, less robustly. When I can't read somebody who has more power than I do, I become anxious. And I look at I use my brain power to look. So not only does it diminish trust because I don't know what's going on and I don't know what's happening with this person, but it also actually, in a less elegant way to say it, it makes the people who have less power, quite frankly, temporarily less intelligent. So overall, that being super high on restraint creates issues in that leadership space, often because of the power differential. Time for one more, maybe, Stace?
What the only other question we have is sort of specific to a report, so I'm going to take that one offline and make sure
Okay,
I can follow up on that
great.
directly. Yeah.
All right, so you will get the recording, you'll get the deck. I'm going to share additional coaching insights for the other three, and we'll share our blind spots research for you. If you have any final questions that didn't get answered, you still have time. Drop it in the Q&A. We always make sure that everything gets answered, even if we can't answer it live. If you want to join us for any upcoming certifications, always go to our website under events. You'll also see upcoming additional webinars. So please don't be shy. If we can help in any way, we're happy to share our research. So thanks everybody for spending your time with us. We really love doing these. We like sharing who we are in the world, and what we're discovering. And we always want to know what you're interested in, because what you're curious about is a big part of how we pursue our research. So thanks everybody.
Thanks, Trisha.